I never thought my life would become this complicated. My name is Layla Marshall, and at 38 years old, I'm a military veteran and single mum fighting for custody of my 16-year-old daughter, Maddie. When she called me from the police station that night, her voice trembling with fear, I felt my world collapse. Her stepfather, Warren, claimed she attacked him, but the bruises on my baby girl told a different story. The system was ready to believe him until something happened that changed everything. If you've ever had to fight to protect your child from someone who should have been protecting them, drop your location below, subscribe, and stay with me. What happened after I walked into that police station changed everything. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly where everything began to unravel. I enlisted in the army right after high school, full of patriotism and dreams of serving my country. That's where I met Greg. We were both young, ambitious, and thought we had our whole lives figured out. We married quickly, perhaps too quickly, after only 8 months of dating. When I found out I was pregnant with Maddie, we were stationed at Fort Bragg. I still remember the mix of terror and joy I felt holding that positive pregnancy test. Maddie was born while I was still on active duty, a beautiful baby with Greg's blue eyes and my dark curly hair. I took my maternity leave and then returned to my logistics position, juggling motherhood and military life. It wasn't easy, but we made it work, or so I thought. My first deployment to Afghanistan came when Maddie was 4. Leaving her was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but Greg assured me they would be fine. I called whenever I could, treasuring those brief video chats where Maddie would press her tiny hands to the screen and tell me about her day at preschool. 6 months into my 12-month deployment, the video calls with Greg became shorter, his excuses more frequent. I sensed something was wrong, but pushed the feeling aside, focusing on my mission and counting days until I could hold my daughter again. 2 weeks before my scheduled return, a fellow soldier awkwardly handed me her phone. On the screen was a Facebook post Greg at a restaurant with a woman named Stephanie, his arm around her waist. The caption read, "Finally found my soulmate." The timestamp showed it was posted while I was dodging mortar fire in Kandahar. When I finally returned home, Greg didn't even have the decency to meet me at the base. Instead, Maddie was brought by a family readiness group volunteer. My 8-year-old daughter was the one who had to tell me that Daddy lives with Miss Stephanie now, and that they said you knew. The divorce was bitter. Greg, with Stephanie's family money behind him, hired an expensive attorney who worked tirelessly to paint me as an unstable veteran. Meanwhile, I was living in a small apartment, stretching my military salary to cover basic needs and legal fees. They played up every hardship of military life, my deployments, the moves, the long hours, as evidence that I couldn't provide stability. Despite everything, we initially received a joint custody arrangement. Maddie would spend weekdays with Greg since his job as a financial analyst gave him more regular hours than my military schedule. I got weekends and alternating holidays. But Greg wasn't satisfied. He began a campaign of small violations, returning Maddie late from my weekends, scheduling unmissable activities during my time, forgetting to send her medication or school projects to my house. Each incident seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern designed to limit my role in Maddie's life. Greg married Stephanie almost immediately after our divorce was finalized. Suddenly, my daughter was living in a sprawling suburban home with her own playroom and a backyard pool. Meanwhile, I was honorably discharged after 12 years of service and transitioning to civilian work as a logistics coordinator. The pay was decent, but nothing compared to the lifestyle Greg and Stephanie provided. As Maddie entered her pre-teen years, I noticed troubling changes. My vibrant, talkative daughter became withdrawn during our visits. When I asked about school or friends, her answers grew shorter. She stopped bringing up stories about home life. At first, I thought it was normal adolescent mood swings, but Mother's intuition told me something more was happening. Stephanie's presence complicated everything. She insisted on being copied on all communications about Maddie. She'd accidentally scheduled dentist appointments during my weekends. She introduced herself as Maddie's mum at school functions even when I was present. When Maddie was 12, Greg received a promotion that would move them 2 states away. In court, his lawyer argued convincingly that uprooting Maddie from her primary home would be detrimental to her well-being. The judge agreed, modifying our custody arrangement to give Greg primary physical custody. My time was reduced to 1 weekend per month and split holidays. I still remember the cold feeling spreading through my chest as the gavel came down. Around that time, Warren entered the picture, a colleague of Greg's, who began dating Stephanie. This confused me greatly, but as I later learned, Greg and Stephanie had an arrangement that eventually led to their divorce. What didn't make sense was how quickly Stephanie married Warren after divorcing Greg, and how Greg seemed completely unbothered by this development. Even stranger was that Greg allowed Stephanie to maintain primary custody of Maddie after their divorce, with Warren now becoming Maddie's stepfather. I filed for a custody reconsideration, immediately arguing that the significant change in circumstances warranted a review. The judge disagreed, noting that Maddie would remain in the same school and home, just with a different parental configuration. During my monthly visits, I caught glimpses of a strange dynamic between Greg, Stephanie, and Warren. They maintained an unusual friendliness, often meeting for dinners together with Maddie. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was happening. All I knew was that my daughter's eyes had lost their sparkle, and that kept me awake at night. By the time Maddie turned 15, the situation had deteriorated significantly. Greg and Stephanie's divorce had finalized quickly, with Stephanie receiving the house and primary custody of Maddie. Warren moved in immediately, and they were married within months. Greg relocated to another city for work, becoming an increasingly distant figure in Maddie's life. My petition for custody reconsideration was denied again, with the court citing the importance of stability in Maddie's life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Apparently, stability meant keeping her with Stephanie and her new husband rather than her biological mother, who had remained constant. During my monthly visits, the signs of distress became impossible to ignore. Maddie, once passionate about soccer and science, dropped both activities. Her grades slipped from A's and B's to C's and D's. She'd lost weight and dark circles shadowed her eyes. When I asked gentle questions, she'd shut down or change the subject. One weekend, we were making pancakes in my kitchen when Warren called to check in. The moment his name appeared on her phone screen, I saw Maddie flinch. It was subtle, a momentary tightening of her shoulders, a quick flash of fear, but unmistakable to a mother's eye. When I asked if everything was okay at home, she gave me a practiced smile and said, "Everything's fine, Mom. Warren's just strict about rules." The bruises started appearing about 6 months after Warren moved in. The first time it was a cluster of fingerprint-sized marks on Maddie's upper arm. When I asked, she claimed she'd bumped into a door. The next visit there was a fading yellow bruise along her jawline, fell during soccer practice, she said. Though I knew she'd quit the team months earlier. I reported my concerns to Family Services 3 times. Each time they conducted a home visit that Stephanie and Warren had ample time to prepare for. The caseworker described seeing a lovely home environment, with no signs of concern. After the 3rd report, the worker pulled me aside and warned me that false allegations could impact my visitation rights. The family court assigned a new social worker to our case, Ms. Jenkins, a woman who seemed immediately charmed by Warren's professional demeanor and Stephanie's picture-perfect home. When I tried to show her photos I'd taken documenting Maddie's injuries, she dismissed them as normal teenage bumps and bruises, and suggested I might be looking for problems due to custody disappointment. For Maddie's 16th birthday, I saved for months to throw her a small celebration at my apartment. I invited a few of her old friends from the neighborhood, made her favorite lemon cake, and bought her a camera she'd been eyeing for her photography interest. For a few hours, I glimpsed my real daughter again, laughing, blowing out candles, opening presents with genuine excitement. As I drove her home that evening, Maddie grew quieter with each mile. Just before we reached their house, she whispered, "Sometimes I think about running away." Yay! My heart froze, but before I could respond, she shook her head and said, "Forget I said anything, it's stupid." That night, I couldn't sleep. My military training had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct was screaming that my daughter was in danger. The next morning, I bought a prepaid phone and tucked it inside the teddy bear I'd kept from her childhood. When I gave it to her, I simply said, "If you ever need me for anything, anytime, I'm 1 call away. Keep this somewhere safe." She nodded, understanding immediately, and hid the bear in her backpack. I began building a support network. My army friend Taylor had become a police officer in our county. She listened to my fears and advised me on documentation. I started therapy with Dr. Rivera, who specialized in family trauma. She encouraged me to keep detailed records of everything I observed without confrontation that might give Stephanie and Warren reason to further restrict my access. I created a digital journal meticulously noting dates, times, and descriptions of every concerning observation. I discreetly photographed Maddie's injuries when possible, measuring them against common objects for scale. I recorded our conversations when legally permissible, always hoping I was being paranoid, always fearing I wasn't doing enough. Our last visit before everything exploded happened on a rainy Sunday. I noticed fresh bruises encircling Maddie's wrist as she reached for her water glass. They formed a distinct handprint pattern. When I gently asked what happened, she mumbled something about getting her arm caught in a kitchen cabinet door. The explanation made no anatomical sense, but the fear in her eyes stopped me from pushing further. That night, I lay awake replaying the memory of Maddie's expression when Warren had called her name as she was leaving my apartment. It wasn't just fear, it was resignation, the look of someone who has learned that resistance only makes things worse. I'd seen that same expression on civilians in war zones. I never thought I'd see it on my daughter's face. I was working late at the logistics center that night, covering for a colleague who had a family emergency. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I entered shipping data into our system, the midnight hour making my eyes heavy. When my phone rang at 2:17 a.m., displaying an unknown number, my first thought was that it must be work-related, perhaps a delayed shipment or security issue. "Hello," I answered, stifling a yawn. The voice on the other end shattered my exhaustion instantly. "Mom?" Maddie's voice was barely audible, thick with tears. I sat up straight, adrenaline flooding my system. "Maddie, what's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm at the police station on Oakwood Drive," she whispered, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Warren." He got angry because I was texting Hannah after curfew. He started yelling, then he grabbed me. He hit me, Mom, multiple times. My hands gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "My face hurts and my ribs, but that's not why I'm calling." Her voice cracked. "Warren told the police I attacked him with scissors. Stephanie's backing him up. They're saying I went crazy when he took my phone away." The blood drained from my face. "That's absurd." "What does the officer handling the case say?" "That's the problem, Mom." Maddie's voice dropped even lower. "They believe him. Warren knows people here. They're talking about juvenile detention. Mom, I'm scared." "Listen to me," I said, already grabbing my car keys and heading for the door. "Don't say anything else. I'm on my way right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Mom, hurry, please." Maddie's voice cut off suddenly. Maddie, I called into the silent phone. The call had ended. I ran to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the ignition. As I sped toward the police station, I called Taylor, praying she might be on duty, but the call went straight to voicemail. "Taylor, it's Layla. Maddie's at Oakwood Station. They're believing Warren's lies about her attacking him. I need help. Call me." During that 15-minute drive, memories flooded my mind, Maddie taking her first steps toward me, arms outstretched. Maddie on her first day of kindergarten wearing mismatched socks because she insisted they were more interesting. Maddie at 10 showing me a science project she'd created about the solar system. Now my baby was sitting in a police station accused of assault by the man who was supposed to protect her. When I arrived at the station, I forced myself to take 3 deep breaths before entering. My military training had taught me that emotional reactions rarely help tactical situations. I needed to be strategic, not just maternal. The desk sergeant barely looked up when I approached. "My daughter, Madison Bennett, is here. I'm her mother, Layla Marshall." He lazily flipped through some papers. "Bennett, the domestic incident. Officer Daniels is handling that. Have a seat." "I'd like to see my daughter immediately," I stated firmly. "Officer Daniels will be with you shortly," he repeated, already turning back to his computer. After 15 excruciating minutes, a young officer appeared. "Miss Marshall, I'm Officer Daniels. I'm handling your daughter's case tonight." "What exactly is she being accused of, and has she received medical attention for her injuries?" Officer Daniels consulted his notepad. "According to Mr. Blackwell, your daughter became violent when he confiscated her phone for breaking house rules. He states she grabbed scissors from a desk and lunged at him. He defended himself and restrained her until she calmed down, then brought her here to file a report." "And my daughter's version?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "She claims Mr. Blackwell assaulted her, but there's no evidence of that. Mrs. Blackwell corroborates her husband's account completely." "No evidence." I felt my temper rising. "Have you looked at my daughter? Has anyone photographed her injuries?" Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "She has some bruising, but Mr. Blackwell explained those occurred while restraining her during her outburst." "I want to see her. Now." Officer Daniels led me to a small room where Maddie sat hunched in a plastic chair. When she looked up, I had to bite my tongue to keep from gasping. Her left cheek was swollen, a darkening bruise forming below her eye. More bruises, distinct finger marks circled her upper arms. "Mom," she cried, jumping up and throwing her arms around me. I felt her trembling as I held her. "I'm here now," I whispered. "I'm going to fix this." Officer Daniels cleared his throat. Ms. Marshall, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell want to press charges for assault. Given Madison's age, she'll likely be processed through juvenile court, but for tonight she'll remain in custody. I spun to face him. My daughter is clearly the victim here. I want her injuries documented and a proper investigation conducted. That's not necessary at this point. We have 2 adult witnesses against 1 teenager with a history of discipline problems. What history? I demanded. My daughter has never been in trouble with the law. Before Officer Daniels could respond, the station door opened. Warren and Stephanie walked in, followed by a man in an expensive suit I assumed was their lawyer. Warren, tall, well-dressed, with a carefully groomed beard that helped hide his weak chin, carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed. Beside him, Stephanie looked immaculate. Even at this hour, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression a practiced mask of concern. Warren nodded to Officer Daniels with casual familiarity. Jim, thanks for handling this so discreetly. He turned to me with a look of rehearsed sympathy. Layla, I'm sorry you had to be dragged into this. We tried our best with Maddie's behavioural issues, but tonight crossed a line. I felt Maddie stiffen beside me. I kept my arm around her shoulders, a physical reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. The only line crossed tonight was when you put your hands on my daughter, I replied, keeping my voice deliberately calm. Warren sighed dramatically, sharing a look with Stephanie. This is exactly the kind of enabling that's contributed to her problems. Stephanie and I have tried to provide structured consequences. Just then, the station door opened again as shifts changed. A tall officer walked in, removing his jacket as he nodded to the desk sergeant. When he turned and saw me, he froze. Recognition washed over his face, followed quickly by confusion. Staff Sergeant Marshall, he asked, his eyes widening as they moved from me to Maddie and back again. Everything in the room seemed to pause as Lieutenant James Peterson stared at me. I hadn't been called Staff Sergeant Marshall in years, but I recognized him immediately. He had served under my command during my second tour in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Peterson, I acknowledged relief washing through me at seeing a familiar face. I didn't know you were with this department. He approached professional, but with a warmth in his eyes that had been absent from every other officer in the building. 5 years now. What's... His gaze landed on Maddie's bruised face, then shifted to Warren and Stephanie. His expression hardened. What's going on here? Officer Daniels straightened his posture slightly. Domestic disturbance call, sir. Mr. Blackwell brought in his stepdaughter after she attacked him with scissors. We were about to process her. Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly. I'll take over from here, Daniels. His tone left no room for argument. Warren stepped forward, extending his hand. Warren Blackwell, I believe we met at the Chamber of Commerce dinner last month. Peterson ignored the outstretched hand. I remember. I'll need to speak with everyone individually. Officer Daniels, please show Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell and their attorney to interview room 2. Ms. Marshall and her daughter can wait in my office. Warren's confident smile faltered. Is that really necessary? We've already given statements and it's nearly 4 a.m. We're all exhausted. Standard procedure in cases involving minors, Peterson replied flatly. My office is this way, Staff Sergeant. As Peterson led us away, I caught Warren and Stephanie exchanging concerned glances. In Peterson's office, he closed the door and turned to us. I need to understand exactly what happened, he said, his tone softening. But first, has anyone documented Madison's injuries? I shook my head. Officer Daniels didn't think it was necessary. Peterson's jaw tightened momentarily. That was an oversight. Officer Diana Rodriguez will handle that immediately. He made a quick call, and minutes later, a female officer arrived to take Maddie to another room. When we were alone, Peterson leaned forward. Layla, I need to know what's going on. The Blackwells are prominent in this community. Warren sits on several boards and donates to the Police Benevolent Fund. Those connections don't influence how I do my job, but I need to be thorough. I took a deep breath and told him everything: the custody battle, the gradual isolation, the bruises, my failed attempts to get family services involved. I showed him the photos I'd taken on my phone during visits, the journal entries documenting my concerns. As I spoke, Peterson took detailed notes, his expression growing more troubled. Why didn't Maddie tell anyone? He asked. Fear, shame, manipulation, all the classic reasons, I replied. Plus, every time she or I tried to report concerns, Warren and Stephanie presented this perfect family image that everyone believed. Officer Rodriguez returned with Maddie and a folder of photographs. Lieutenant, you need to see these, she said quietly, placing several images on the desk. I also requested her medical records from previous ER visits. 3 in the past year, a sprained wrist, bruised ribs, and a concussion, all explained as sports accidents or falls. Peterson examined the photos carefully, then looked at Maddie. Madison, I need to hear your account of tonight and what's been happening in that house. Maddie glanced at me nervously. I nodded encouragingly, and she began to speak. Her voice was shaky at first, then grew stronger as she described Warren's escalating abuse over the past 2 years. The pushing downstairs when no one was looking. The belt. The emotional torment and threats. Tonight I was texting my friend Hannah after curfew, she explained. Warren came in without knocking and grabbed my phone. He saw I was using the hidden phone Mom gave me for emergencies and just exploded. He hit me across the face, then grabbed me when I tried to run. I managed to break away and grabbed scissors from my desk, not to attack him, just to keep him back. He charged at me anyway, and I held the scissors out in front of me. He got a small scratch on his arm, then he knocked them away and threw me against the wall. Officer Rodriguez nodded. The bruising pattern on her back and shoulders is consistent with that account. Stephanie saw everything. Maddie continued, tears streaming down her face. She just stood in the doorway watching. When Warren said we were going to the police, she immediately backed up his story that I attacked him for no reason. Peterson turned to Officer Rodriguez. What about the neighbor's security camera you mentioned? Rodriguez pulled out her tablet. The Martins across the street have a doorbell camera. I noticed it when responding to the call and got their permission to review footage. She played a clip showing Maddie running from the house, Warren following and roughly grabbing her arm, then forcing her into a car. The timestamp matched Maddie's account exactly. Peterson stood up. I've heard and seen enough. Madison will be released into her mother's custody pending investigation. Officer Rodriguez, please prepare the paperwork. I'm going to speak with the Blackwells. When Peterson left, I pulled Maddie into a gentle hug, careful of her injuries. You're coming home with me, I whispered. He's never going to hurt you again. 20 minutes later, we heard raised voices from the interview room. Warren emerged red-faced, followed by Stephanie and their attorney, who was urgently whispering something to them. Peterson walked behind them, his expression professional but resolute. This isn't over, Warren hissed as he passed us. You've always been unstable, Layla. No one will believe this fantasy you've concocted. Peterson stepped between us. Mr. Blackwell, I strongly advise against making any potentially intimidating comments. Please leave the premises immediately. As Warren and Stephanie exited, Peterson turned to me. Take Madison home. A restraining order is being processed and I've opened an investigation into the pattern of abuse. This won't be easy. They have resources and connections, but the truth is on your side. And so am I. As we walked out of the station into the early morning light, Maddie leaned against me, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Mom, she whispered. I was so scared they wouldn't believe me. I squeezed her hand. I will always believe you, and I will always fight for you. Always. That first night in my apartment, I made up the spare bed with fresh sheets, placing extra blankets nearby in case Maddie got cold. I wanted everything to be perfect, as if comfort could somehow erase the trauma. When I checked on her around 3 a.m., I found her curled into a tight ball, tears streaming silently down her face. Oh, baby, I whispered, sitting gently on the edge of the bed. I thought I was handling it. She sobbed, her words tumbling out between gasps. I thought if I just followed his rules, kept